There is a photograph that needs no caption. You look at it, and something inside you stops. A man in yellow, in the air, his face turned toward the sky as if giving thanks to some invisible force. The ball has just crossed the line. The stadium is on fire with sound. And the opposing goalkeeper is on his knees, not in defeat, but as a witness. As if he too understood that he had just seen something football would never repeat with such perfection. That photograph was taken in Mexico, in June of 1970. And what it captured was not merely a goal. It was the moment when football stopped being a sport and became, for the first and perhaps only time in history, a form of art. But before we arrive at that instant, you need to understand the context. You need to know what was at stake. Because the 1970 World Cup was not simply a football tournament. It was a civilizational event. It was the moment when the entire world sat in front of its television sets, for the first time in color, to watch what many were already calling the greatest team that had ever existed. And the pressure on that squad was of a nature that goes far beyond the pitch. Brazil arrived in Mexico carrying an enormous burden. In 1966, at the England World Cup, the national team had been eliminated in the group stage. A historic humiliation for a country that considered itself the natural owner of world football. In 1968, Brazil was living under a military dictatorship that had hardened brutally with the AI-5 Institutional Act. Demonstrations were crushed. Artists were exiled. The country's youth was suffocating. And the military government, with the cold calculation of those who understand bread and circuses, saw in football a golden opportunity. A World Cup won by Brazil would be living proof that the country was on the right path. That order brought progress. That Brazil was great. Coach João Saldanha had been dismissed months before the tournament under circumstances that were never fully explained. He was an openly declared communist, clashed with the regime, and had even publicly stated that Pele had poor eyesight and might not play. General Emilio Medici, who was president and had a favorite player that Saldanha refused to call up, applied pressure. And Saldanha was gone. In his place came Mario Zagallo, a champion as a player in 1958 and 1962, discreet, pragmatic, and above all, aligned enough not to create political headaches. Zagallo inherited a squad that was simply absurd. Pele, of course, who had suffered so much from the brutal fouling in 1966 that he had considered never playing in another World Cup. Tosteo, the center-forward with surgical vision who had undergone a delicate eye surgery shortly before the tournament and arrived in Mexico almost as a medical miracle. Rivellino, with that mustache and that left-footed shot that seemed fired from a medieval catapult. Jairzinho, the hurricane, who had promised himself he would score in every game of the tournament. Gerson, the invisible intelligence of the midfield, the metronome that opponents never managed to stop. And Clodoaldo, Carlos Alberto Torres, Everaldo. It was a generation that would not come again. Brazil's group included Czechoslovakia, Romania, and England, the reigning champions. The match against England, on June 7, 1970, at the Jalisco Stadium in Guadalajara, would alone have been enough to make this cup an eternal landmark. And there was a moment in that game, a moment that lasted less than 2 seconds, that entered history not for what happened, but for what did not happen. Pele receives a cross in the box. Header. The ball travels toward the lower left corner of the goal. Gordon Banks, considered by many the greatest goalkeeper in history up to that moment, is on the wrong side. The ball is already going in. And then something happens that defies physics, logic, and common sense. Banks dives, stretches his right arm toward the ground and touches the ball with his fingertips, flicking it up and over the crossbar. Pele had already shouted, "Goal!" and put his hands to his head. Banks had saved what should have been the most beautiful goal in World Cup history. And Pele, instead of losing his temper, turned to Banks and said, "I thought that was a goal." With a smile. Because Pele knew. He knew he had just witnessed something extraordinary from the other side of the pitch. Brazil won that game 1-0, with a goal from Jairzinho. And they pressed forward like a machine with no flaws, only different speeds. Every opponent that stepped onto the field against that Brazil walked off feeling they had encountered something for which no preparation was possible. But the moment that defines that World Cup, the moment that defines 20th century football, happens in the final. June 21, 1970. Azteca Stadium, Mexico City. Brazil versus Italy. On one side, the joyful, creative, almost anarchic football of Brazil. On the other, the Italian catenaccio, the art of defending elevated to its most refined point. It was like placing a jazz pianist against an architect. Two geniuses operating in completely different languages. Italy had reached that final through a match that would be called the game of the century. The semi-final against West Germany, at the Azteca, ended 4-3 after dramatic extra time with 5 goals. A game so epic that the Azteca had a plaque installed on the side of the pitch commemorating that specific match. But the Italians arrived at the final exhausted, physically and emotionally. And Brazil was operating at another level entirely. Pele opens the scoring with a header in the first half. Bonacegna equalizes for Italy. Halftime arrives with the tension of those who know that history is being written in real time. And in the second half, Brazil simply dismantled the Italians. Gerson scored the second with a left-footed shot from outside the box that curled into the corner as if the ball had eyes. Jairzinho scored the third, fulfilling his personal promise to score in every game. And then we arrive at the fourth goal. The goal that is not merely the most beautiful in World Cup history. It is the most beautiful goal in the history of football. Full stop. Clodoaldo recovers the ball in his own half and moves forward, dribbling. He beats one. He beats two. He beats 3 Italians with an ease that borders on the surreal. He passes to Rivellino. Rivellino lays it off to Tostao on the left. Tostao plays it back to Pele in the box. Pele senses without looking that Carlos Alberto is arriving on the right side at full speed. Pele simply lets the ball pass between his legs. And Carlos Alberto, the captain, arrives at full pace and strikes it first time with his right foot into the corner. The ball enters like a thunderbolt. Goalkeeper Albertosai doesn't even move. There is nothing to be done. Carlos Alberto celebrates with his arms wide open, running toward the crowd. Pele follows with a smile that could hold the whole world. And the Azteca, with its 107,000 spectators, erupts in a sound that feels like Mexico itself vibrating from the inside out. Brazil won 4-1. And earned the right to keep the Jules Rimet Trophy forever, as their third title. The trophy was brought back to Brazil on a military aircraft, escorted as if it were a national treasure, and for many people, it was exactly that. The military regime used the victory as propaganda to its fullest extent. The song, Pra Frente Brasil, played everywhere. The players were received as national heroes. Medici appeared alongside Pele in a photograph that Pele himself said years later he regretted taking, as it was used to legitimize a government he had never supported. But here is the part that few people know. The part that was left out of the official documentaries, out of the regime-organized celebrations. That 1970 squad, with all its genius, with all its collective brilliance, existed within a structure of control and surveillance that would shock anyone today. The players had their correspondence monitored. There were reports of security agents at the hotel. The national team was used as a tool of the state in ways that the players only fully understood years later, when the regime fell and the archives began to be opened. And Pele, the greatest of all, the man who had vowed never to play in another World Cup after 1966 and was convinced to return, finished that tournament with 4 goals, 6 assists, and the tournament's golden ball. But what no statistic can capture is what happened when he touched the ball in front of that packed Azteca. There was a silence within the noise, a collective holding of breath, as if 107,000 people knew they were about to see something that only happens once in a lifetime. That World Cup ended. The years passed. The dictatorship fell. The Jules Rimet Trophy was stolen in 1983 and never recovered, melted down, most likely, by thieves who had no idea what they held in their hands. The players grew old. Some died. Football changed, became faster, more physical, more tactical, wealthier, and perhaps, in some way impossible to measure, a little less free. But that photograph still exists. The man in yellow in the air, his face turned to the sky, the ball already beyond the line. And every time someone sees it for the first time, the same thing happens, a silence. A pause. Because some things need no explanation. They simply exist, perfect, outside of time, as proof that there was a moment when a human being did something with a leather ball and his feet that should never have been possible. And that is why we still talk about it today. And that is why we always will. If this story moved you in any way, hit the like button right now. It seems like a small thing, but it makes all the difference in helping more people find this content. Drop a comment below and tell me what you thought, and let me know what city and country you're watching from. I love knowing where this community comes from. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and hit the bell. There are even more surprising stories on the way. One more thing. While researching for this video, I came across a very interesting product connected to the world of football and nostalgia. Something that, if you are passionate about this kind of history, you'll want to know about. I left the link in the first pinned comment. It's not an aggressive pitch, just a curious recommendation that makes a lot of sense for anyone who made it to the end of this video. See you in the next one. And trust me, you won't want to miss it.